Let's see. So we are now streaming live, and I'm gonna check LinkedIn. Okay, I'm showing we're live there. Cool. We are live. Awesome, Vlad. Very cool. So, I have some thoughts again before we get in. And I was waiting for this till we go live. So if you
hmm
guys are watching on LinkedIn, and I can probably also drop it on the Solus PLC Facebook, or the Solus PLC YouTube. I'm gonna drop it in chat. This is the Change Your Life giveaway that we were talking about last week with Preston. So if you guys are interested, it is a Festo drive, and it is the Festo server motor, um, CMMT-ST-C8-1C, et cetera, et cetera. So we talked about that last week.
Where's the link?
I dropped
I
it
don't
in the
see.
chat on I dropped it in the chat on LinkedIn. I also dropped it in the chat on YouTube. We may have to redrop them after
Okay, yeah, I see it.
after we're
I
done.
see it.
Chats on YouTube are always a little weird. But if you guys have not seen that, and you're young in your career and some hardware would make a difference to you guys, please go ahead and register for that. If you are not young in your career, if you're more experienced and you know of someone who would be interested, and a servo motor or a servo setup could be a major boon to them in their career, please go ahead and do that. Preston had some fantastic engagement on the first time. The person he gave it to was actually able to leverage that into some hands-on experience, and they are now working at a food and beverage client, and we can thank Jordan for that. And Jordan just showed up in the chat. Jordan texted me before. His family may or may not be forced to watch our stream once again as they're eating dinner. But no. So we want to go ahead and talk about that, as we're letting everyone come in. Solus PLC, the YouTube channel, almost at 21,000 subscribers, and because it's Vlad's channel and Vlad is not going to ask for it, I'm going to ask you guys, if you haven't subscribed to Solus PLC on like all 18 of your YouTube accounts, we need a silver play button right over Vlad's right shoulder, next to that Rockwell PLC up there. I think, yeah, that one. I think it's going to look great. I think it's
I
going to
think so
look,
too.
yep.
We
But
still
no,
have quite a ways to go, but yeah.
we do have quite a ways to go. But I mean, I think that you guys, since I have paid attention, like you're close to 20,000. You guys have been moving up there quickly. You guys have been dropping a lot of very interesting content, as always. Plus, everyone gets
Thanks.
to see
Appreciate
my,
that as
of
usual.
course. Plus, everyone gets to see my beautiful face. If you guys have missed previous episodes and are interested in watching, please go ahead and check us out at manufacturinghub.live. What else? I think that kind of like sums it up. We've got a bunch of interesting topics that we want to jump into, and you want to just jump into them, Vlad?
Yeah, I'll let you do a quick introduction. I believe we're on episode 16, right?
That's crazy. Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 16 of Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and that guy on the other side of me, Vlad. We have somehow made it to 16 episodes, which is probably more than anyone who has followed us from the beginning thought that we were going to get to. And we are in between a couple of themes. We've got some exciting things coming up that we probably want to hold off as we are committing all of our guests for the next theme, but that should be very exciting. And so, with that, we're kind of going through. We're going to do some mid-year recaps, talk about trends, talk about what we've been doing. Vlad had an interesting post earlier about some books that we've talked about. Want to get everyone's feedback on that, and maybe talk about and see if people are ready to go back live in person. How does that sound, Vlad?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Awesome. but no. So let's start on the books. So
Mhm.
we had a couple of people. Huck was on, and I don't know, Chris was on, and I think when Preston was on the first time, everyone had talked about, a book that they very much like. And I'm not necessarily sure how we got to this, but it became at some point, I think going into the future, we're going to ask people, what their best manufacturing book is, or within the
Yeah.
manufacturing industry,
Mhm.
what book would they recommend? And so I think I've read most of the books that have been recommended, but Vlad, you were saying that you recently got through a couple of books. You want to share your thoughts a little bit on that?
Yeah, so it's the two books that were recommended by two of our guests. So one was by Chris, and that was the Phoenix Project, and the other one, The Goal, by Huck.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them, I guess, both of the podcasts, if you want to listen to them, are posted on the website, as Dave had mentioned. But in a nutshell, The Goal, it's the you probably read it, but it's the story of a plant manager that is struggling in his role. And so
Mm-hmm.
he's given an ultimatum to turn the plant around. I believe it was in 3 months, 3 or 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he uncovered, I obviously don't want to spoil all the details, is that the metrics or the KPIs that they were using at the plant were not accurately reflecting what the business should be pursuing. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's I guess obviously, I never really had to shift KPIs in the roles that I was in, but in many ways, I feel that there's a lot of KPIs that are prescribed, and we follow them without fully questioning, well, like what exactly is this metric? How is it
Mm-hmm.
calculated? How does it impact the bottom line? And why do we ultimately care? And so in the book, they talk a lot about, so there's this scientist, right, who is essentially coming up, I wouldn't say like with the theories, but with the background as to what truly matters, and he guides this plant manager to get on the right track with his plant. And he asks, I would say, not extremely straightforward questions, but like, why do you really care about this metric, and how is it really calculated? And then brings them to the right path on what truly matters, right? He starts asking questions like, why do we care about efficiency? What does efficiency really mean? Then they talk a lot about the concept, I feel, of bottlenecks, right? And even someone who's been, so I've been deploying a lot of data projects over the last 5 years. And I think everyone knows what a bottleneck is, but it's, I think, a whole other idea to conceptualize that in practice and what happens, let's say, once the bottleneck issues are addressed, right? And so they talk a lot about like the bottleneck started shifting. Well, like what does that mean, right? It goes to a different machine, and then like how do you balance all of that out? And I personally even wouldn't say that I have an in-depth understanding of that concept, but I think like the book does a really good job on raising those questions, right? That you wouldn't otherwise have. You kind of assume like, yeah, we understand what the bottleneck is, like we're addressing those issues, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody really knows what's going to happen once you address them.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
yeah.
And on that one, I would say there was also, I think, a couple of other good points. It also kind of paralleled his life and some of the,
Mm.
problems he potentially had at home. And
Yep.
it's very open ended. So when I remember reading the book the first time, and so you go through and it's this gentleman's journey. And so, but the questions that are being asked are almost questions that you can ask yourselves when you put them in your shoes and be like, okay, this is my facility. Let me go through the questions that are being asked and figure out if there is a way for me to kind of use these questions and understand what's going on in a
Yeah.
way that I can leverage this book in my everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. I like one of the points too was the efficiency with robotics, right? Like how they put in robots and increase the efficiency of the plant by 30%, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the scientist starts asking questions on like, what do you really care about, first of all, efficiency, and why do you think that they brought you 30% of that increase, right? And it's hard to explain, I guess, over just a short conversation, but the way they were thinking about efficiency was incorrect, and it was not truly bringing them any essentially like bottom dollar savings or an
Mm-hmm.
increase in sales, right? So there was really no efficiency. They just like shifted things around, and the company, as I've seen in certain instances, was essentially advocating for robotics because of that
Mm-hmm.
30%. So it's
Yep.
just an interesting thought to have, right? Because the numbers can be, I think, manipulated in many different ways. but
Hmm.
what do they truly represent is another question. And then the second book, so the Phoenix Project, I don't know if you read that one as well, but in a nutshell, I would say it's somewhat similar of like a path, but it's more from an IT perspective.
Hmm.
So it's an IT manager that gets promoted to a vice president role because of a departure of the vice president, either by being fired or being shifted around, but anyways, like he leaves. And so he's promoted into this leadership role, and they have multiple projects that are also similar in the sense to the goal, where the plant, or the entire facility in this case, they have multiple plants, is struggling to keep up with a bunch of different systems. It's like payroll upgrades, and so they're struggling to maintain, or like they're struggling to put out fires all over the place. I didn't finish that one yet, but ultimately it's just the way he deals with the teams. Like he starts to prioritize work. Then he's got a director that comes in and starts asking, well, like, what is like your actual like value to the organization, right? And like in many ways, in a leadership role, it's not just the complete completion of like tasks. It's more like how to understand, how to organize those things, how to allocate personnel. Like there's a lot of interconnections between different departments as well. So there's it's an interesting take, and it also has those components, on a personal level,
Hmm.
the way it's described in the goal. So
No, no,
just a different perspective.
I love that. So I have not read the Phoenix Project yet. It's on my list. Um, and so that is certainly, bumping up higher on the list based upon, what you're saying and what Chris is saying. And I know Vlad and I have kind of kicked it around, but we'd be interested in people kind of watching this. If you guys want to, type it in the comments, if you want to reach out to us and let us know kind of your thoughts. Should we dig deeper in these books? Would you guys be interested on, joining some sort of newsletter in which after the episodes, when we send them up, we'll also include the actual book and kind of a snippet about the book. We think that there's value here. And I generally do my best to read every book that people, recommend as their one book. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost always a very good thing. And so kind of interested on the feedback of everyone else as to if that would be something that you're interested in, you would find value in.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a long list of different books. I think Jordan had recommended the "Never Split the Difference" by
Yep.
Chris Voss.
That's a good
I
book.
also really like "Good to Great,"
Hmm.
right? So this, I think Chris had mentioned that one. But I mean, there's a lot
I
of
think so.
different, I feel, business books in general, but
Hmm.
not a lot in like maybe the manufacturing space specifically.
Hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
it's interesting to kind of maybe get a list um, of those books together.
No, I agree. And I would also say one of my favorite things about reading books in the manufacturing space is realizing that most of these were written in like the 80s and 90s. And like so they did the research in that time period, and like on Good to Great, the Jim Collins book. So I read that in the early 2000s. Maybe I read it a second time, like right after the financial crisis, or like maybe while we were going through this.
Hmm.
And just kind of looking at all of the companies and all of the things that they had done up until this point, and seeing how many of them had failed, right? Or how many of them had lost their way and had to kind of reestablish what they were doing, even though the last 100 years might have done them, very well. So I think it's
Hmm.
always interesting to look at those, in the historical perspective and the research that was done, but also in the what's happened in the 10 or 20 years since the books are written.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like, I still take it as like personal development to some
Oh
extent,
yeah.
right? Like, I'm not trying to like benchmark companies, even though I do find it interesting, but I'm still
Yep.
trying to like improve as, I guess, as a person, as an engineer, as a manager, whatever. Trying to
Hmm.
learn new skills, like understand how different things are done. Again, and I think it's really cool that it ties back to manufacturing because, for example, in the goal, you could almost like picture yourself on that plant floor. They even
Hmm.
put in, I don't know if you listened to the audiobook or you read a handprint, but when he describes like I'm walking on the manufacturing floor, like they actually put
Hmm.
like the sounds of like hammers or like machinery running in the background, so you like, I don't know, you kind of like feel it, you know what I mean, you remember those times where I was walking in that aisle.
I
So
love
it's
that.
I find it pretty cool.
I love that. I love that a lot. No, no, awesome. So, but no, please, everyone, either leave us your feedback or drop us some emails or some notes on all of the platforms and let us know what you think. And so kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about, Vlad, I think it's a question to you as
Yep.
to, and I think I know the answer, but are you ready to go back and do some like in-person events and like get across the Canadian border and come see the rest of us in this side of the world?
Yeah, I mean, that is a question that I get asked fairly frequently. I think that, I've had my fair share of travel in well, I guess before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And I somewhat got fed up with the travel, decided to take a more remote role, and even though like still traveled quite a bit. But I think, the in-person presence is extremely valuable, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you are working with new clients. And again, like I've done this during the pandemic where you get introduced over Zoom and, they send you all the documentation, like all the requirements, and you still obviously keep in touch with them over Zoom. But I never felt it was the same as, going to a client's site and shaking somebody's hand and like
Mm-hmm.
going to see the facility in person. It feels different, and I feel that you got a different, not responsibility per se, but different rapport with that person, and so the expectations are slightly shifted, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're I wouldn't say like to use it as a cover up of being scolded more for making mistakes, but in a
Mm-hmm.
sense I think you are like people are a lot more cautious when they haven't seen you. They just see a face that's programming their plant and has access
Mm-hmm.
to all of their critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
And when mistakes come up, it's a lot more difficult to communicate because they will come up eventually, if even if
Absolutely.
it's you or somebody else making the changes under you. So
No.
but yeah, I mean, like I'm ready to go back. Canada has a very strict
Mm-hmm.
policy still. There's ways around it in the sense that you can drive into the country and not have to go to a government mandated hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at different ways to be able to fly out of Canada and then come back, like I said, into a closer city like Plattsburgh and then drive up to Montreal. But I really think that in-person presence is important in our space. That
Yep.
being said, I think there's also, like, I've read a few articles that because commercial real estate is losing a lot of value in many areas, there's been a push to bring people back to work, right? And so I don't agree necessarily that every single employee, it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense for them to be in person, right? Like I think a
Yep.
lot of the software development can be done remotely, and it makes a lot of sense to keep it that way. But we'll see what happens. Again, I just don't know enough about I would say like human psychology to say for
Mm-hmm.
sure what long term impact is going to have on our work culture, work life
Mm-hmm.
balance, and whatever other, I guess, things like it could impact.
No, no. So I would agree with your thoughts. So when I asked the question, I was mostly thinking about events and traveling to customer sites. And so
Yeah.
there was a, probably 12 or 14-month period between flying to a customer site. Like there were certainly times where I drove to customer sites, but there was probably a year plus period between, flying to go to a customer site for a week or more. And I did that a month or 6 weeks ago, and that was actually kind of nice. The flying experience, absolutely not nice. You kind of lose all of the minor fun things about flying. Those are all generally gone at the moment. But being able to go back to events would be nice. To go see all the people that you normally only see at events would be nice. And so I earlier this week, or I guess maybe last week, I had asked on a LinkedIn poll if people are ready to go back to trade shows and events. And so
Hmm.
so far we've had 463 votes. And Vlad, this may surprise you. 87% of people are very excited to go back to trade shows and things like that
Yeah.
after more than a year off. So that certainly includes me. And my thought on trade shows and events like that is unless I'm going to exhibit or speak, I'm probably good at 2 or 3 shows a year. Yeah, I'm probably good at 2 or 3 shows a year. Much beyond that, just the amount of time it takes out of your schedule is
Yeah.
kind of gets horrific. So in the past, I would certainly go and exhibit or present at shows, and that was part of like the combination sales marketing effort. But just going to events, and at this point, without a client that I would take, I'm probably good at the 2 or 3. I know Automation Fair In Houston is still allegedly on. Well, it is still on and in person at this point. I haven't heard anything about it being something else, and I would imagine with it being in Houston, there
And that's
was
for
there.
Rockwell, right? Automation
Yep,
Fair.
yep.
I thought it was already done in June or July as an
No,
online
it's
event.
a so they have Tech Ed that is a spring or summer event, but Automation Fair is always like right before Thanksgiving,
Gotcha.
and
Yeah, that's right.
it's their big event. They have PSUG, so the user group that you can go buy classes for the Monday, Tuesday, and then I think the event is Wednesday, Thursday, and so that is always that is always a good time when I see a lot of people. I know that I've talked to a couple of people in the comments as to being excited and hopeful, then that comes back. And then I was just talking to Lisa from CSIA, and they are planning to have an in-person event in 2022 when their event comes back. And so it's nice to see events coming back. It'll be interested to see if crowds come back. I've talked to some folks in other parts of the world that are having in-person trade shows and
Hmm.
are saying that it's good to be back. It's good to have those conversations. Those events are so important, especially to distributors, but it is one of those they are not seeing the crowds come back as of yet. So I am wondering, maybe hopeful, that a lot of the smaller events, or a lot of the we need to put on 5 events a year, some of those go away and it's more condensed into a smaller group of exciting events that more people are going to want to go spend some time at.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I guess usually they open the registration a little bit closer, but it looks like it is November 10th and 11th of
Hmm.
this year. I mean, I'm definitely gonna be there if there is an in-person event
Yep.
because again, like to me, the value, obviously I'm not a distributor, I'm not a
Hmm.
vendor, but I think it's the ability to connect with people that you wouldn't otherwise see, right? Like there's definitely the technical sessions and the chats from like very big like Fortune 500 companies where they do presentations on how they integrated certain things that are very interesting, like don't get me wrong, but I think it's the ability to talk to those people
Hmm.
in person, actually like ask them questions,
Hmm.
whereas I think they had that event like you said on Zoom, like the digital version.
Hmm.
And I guess like personally, again, maybe I'm getting old, I'm a millennial, but I just I didn't feel like it gave it justice, right? Like again, there were some good talks that I watched, but it's more I would say like as background kind of a
Hmm.
listen than you sit in the auditorium, you see these people explain their projects. I feel like it's a whole different atmosphere from that standpoint. And again, after the event, there's always really cool meetups, there's things to do, there's
Hmm.
people to talk to, and at the end of the day, I think that's how you build real connections. And so, yeah, I mean, if it's happening, then I'll definitely be there.
No, no, I think that's interesting. I think that'll be the first. That's the first big event that I'm aware of that is coming up that may be in person, and it's always a good event. It always pulls tens of thousands of people, and there are tons of distributor events and other events like that. And it's always good to talk to people in your space. And I don't know of a single other event in which you can go talk to the Rockwell like head of batch or head of MES or kind of anything anything like that other than at Automation Fair. That's the event in which they roll out all of the technical people that they normally keep locked in offices or potentially their house for the last year and a half into the let's go do anything and everything. And it's one of those events that I never get to see all of the people or have all of the conversations that I hope to, but it is always good, and you always kind of feel psyched up about the Rockwell ecosystem, and just walking the floor and realizing what the entirety of that ecosystem is nothing short of impressive.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I'm curious what kind of precautions they're gonna take. You know what I mean? I have a feeling
Mhm.
they're going to limit the number of attendees this year, and I again, like I really hope that I get in early enough to secure a spot. But I've got a feeling in many ways they'll for sure prioritize, the Fortune 500 companies that have been, buyers of their platform. So I don't know how it's going to be handled, but I really hope to get in. So
No,
we'll
it'll
see.
be interesting. Everyone will have to stay tuned. maybe there will be the opportunity to do some sort of live show. Maybe you guys will like and subscribe enough so that we get to the point of we can talk to someone who knows someone at Rockwell who can be like, hey, can these two fools go do a live event if the Canadian border ever opens up again?
And if not, I mean, we'll bring our camera and just stream, directly from the event, and
We will.
hopefully not get kicked out. That's going to be the other
So when
approach.
I signed up for LinkedIn Live, my actual thought was I was just going to stream events that I was going to. So a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when it became a thing, I'm like, oh, this would be so cool. I can stream the events that I'm going to let people see what's going on or give you, the perspective of someone, exhibiting. And then the world shut down, and then I got LinkedIn Live, and I'm like, Vlad, what am I ever going to do with this? Like, everything that I had planned to do is literally shut down for some undetermined time. I'm happy that we've ended up with this, but we can certainly find the opportunity to stream those events as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. What trends? I guess that's our next bullet point.
Yeah.
What trends are you seeing in the industry? Are you seeing some interesting posts, like things changing, or people having different discussions? Feel free to refer back on your polls as well, because I know you post them. I
Mm-hmm.
don't keep up with each and every one of them,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that you're collecting some pretty cool data on some of these topics. What are
Yeah,
your
no. So,
thoughts?
for anyone who doesn't follow, you can check out my website, dave-griffith.com. I've
Mm-hmm.
got, I think we're past 10 LinkedIn polls. Most of them are my own, and a couple are from some other people, including Frank Lamb, who had one to add. And so it's always interesting to kind of see what everyone's doing and everyone's perspective. So we had talked about trends or what we thought was going to be hot at the beginning of the year, and I certainly see a lot of people investing more money in kind of the overall data sphere, if you will, Vlad. And I know that we've talked about this a lot, especially in manufacturing intelligence. But I see more companies understanding the value of data, potentially wanting to get to that machine learning or artificial intelligence, and it becoming okay, we have to go through these processes to clean our data so that we have to go through the process to clean the data so that we can use AR or artificial intelligence and machine learning on it to help us, reach that next future phase. So I certainly see a lot of that, and it kind of seems and feels like those pocketbooks are going to continue to open up. And I have other thoughts, but I'm interested. You were talking a little bit about data projects that you had done. Are you also seeing more interest either from end users or other groups about that?
I mean, I've seen it over the last decade in general, right? Because maybe like I've worked in it for such a long time. I haven't really seen maybe like an up spike in demand, but I
Mhm.
do know that as of the pandemic, there has been, I guess, like more resources allocated because I think like the entry level like employees have been more and more difficult to
Mhm.
acquire. But I wouldn't say like there's been like a massive up spike, but there's still a little bit more interest in like automation technologies in general. And I think data is just another leverage point that you can use to make right decisions, right? Like in the
Mhm.
manufacturing space. And if I may, I will self pitch a little bit. So I actually finalized the website, which is joltech.com. So it has a completely new redesign that is a lot more focused on
Mhm.
data. So if anyone in the chat has a minute to check that out, essentially it is a data-based service. So in addition to what we do with Solus PLC, we are going to be, we are looking for and we are working on a couple of data projects. So ultimately, again, as we spoke about a little bit off stream, so in the last 5 years, I've been working on deploying manufacturing data on essentially a custom developed platform. And so
Mhm.
now I'm making a shift to deploying similar tools, but using off the shelf software, right? So Sepasoft Ignition. I'm trying to get up to speed with TATSoft, and I saw the video that Jim posted for OSI Pi, so I started going through their documentation as well. Obviously, I wouldn't call myself an expert on that system yet, but that's the idea. I mean, like trying to solve manufacturing problems using data. So again, the idea is laid out on the website, but you can see the different steps that we would take in order to assess your plant, then propose different projects to get it up to speed or base condition, and then start looking for opportunities through leveraging data.
No, I certainly see more people who are going down that range as well, and I certainly see, over the last handful of years, and I think it's a shift in thoughts. I think it's a shift in culture, and I think it's a shift in kind of the younger generation who are becoming more part of leadership, who are going through the process of who are going through the process of saying, hey, this works everywhere else. Why can't we use the data that we're collecting to understand what's actually happening in our process and, leverage that as best we can? And so kind of with that, I see a lot of ventures, venture capital backed or otherwise, who are going in and trying to solve kind of this data issue. And it might be,
Yep.
they're trying to build the new MES, or they're trying to build the new ERP, or the CRM, something along those lines. I think that there are lots of different people who are looking for at a variety of different ways, so that it may not just be the, hey, we're going to go spend a whole bunch of money to hopefully collect this data in a proprietary system, and then from that point be able to kind of be able to leverage their data. But at that point, it becomes very hard to hire more people and to bring on additional talent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, look, like let's be completely honest here in the sense that a lot of the tools, that we've just or that I've just mentioned, I I would say like fairly advanced in many
Mm-hmm.
applications. I come from the several Fortune 500 companies that I'm not going to mention, but in many cases, they still count the number of boxes produced using a prox photo eye that
Mm-hmm.
will then, increment a very basic counter, and they record that number on a whiteboard, which then they transcribe into Excel and then make decisions based on that. So I think like, we talk about all of these advanced tools, MES, OE, like I agree that they're extremely important, but I think it also is important to assess the facility and
Mm-hmm.
understand what they're working with before we jump into, like you've mentioned, AI, machine learning. i
Mm-hmm.
i honestly believe that it's coming, but it's going to take a lot more effort to get there than some people may seem to think or portray. And I really take the, how to say, the practical approach, right? I really want to go and see the facility,
Mm-hmm.
assess what's going on, because again, I've been brought in by high level managers that would ask for machine learning and AI, and then you
Mm-hmm.
get to their facility and they've got 50-year-old equipment that is still using, well, first of all, not connected at all to any network for data collection, but is using very old school. I don't know if you've seen those like temperature meters when you have like a round paper that like rotates and there's like a little needle that like
Yeah,
prints
the
out the
chart
temperature.
recorders, paper
Exactly. And
chart
I guess like
recorders. Yeah.
I'm too young to have like seen those being deployed, but I still see them in the field. And like I said, I'm being asked to collect data of those devices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like people don't always realize what it takes, like what kind of an investment it takes to just bring it up to speed to get the data you want, right? Like, so you're not going to make the jump from those to AI machine learning. First of all, you need to upgrade the equipment, you need to assess
Mm-hmm.
which areas you want to collect data from, and then make those transitions. So all I'm trying to say, I guess digital transformation is a buzzword, but there
Mm-hmm.
is some truth and some I would say like direct application of it in the real world scenarios.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've said it before. I don't know if I said it on stream. So I work for a distributor manufacturers rep in the Mid Atlantic, a really good group. sold dozens, maybe 100 chart recorders, every paper chart recorders every year. They'd stock the paper, they'd stock the pens, they'd stock the thermal ones. Every so often you'd get someone who wanted the output. And a lot of that is like food and bev stuff that, you know, they're
Yep.
smaller facilities and it's just more comfortable because they're required to keep records of these temperatures. And so
Hmm.
it's just more comfortable to take the paper when the spiral is done, pull it off, put it into the cabinet, and the paper degrades, but it doesn't really matter because no one's ever going to use it. But if something were to happen, they have the paper, you know, yeah, they have the paper as needed. So I think it's one of those smaller versus larger companies and its perceptions, and there are certainly steps, but those companies are going to have a rude awakening if they want to go from having not knowing what a SQL database is to collecting and running machine learning or artificial intelligence atop
Yep.
some of those applications. And so like
Absolutely.
we were talking a little bit about it, Vlad, but I would say, and we had a whole theme about it, so you guys can go back and check the talent theme. But I would say that the talent market is on fire. It seems like everyone who has an ignition certification or everyone who is a Rockwell or a, you know, Emerson Delta V person is just, it's absolutely on fire. People are spending money, and because end users are spending money, we now need to go through the process of rehiring talent, or increasing the size of the talent in some of these opportunities. So I have found that the talent market is very hot, and I think that was what we thought was going to happen in the beginning of the year. We thought that when manufacturing comes back, that the talent market was going to be hot, but I'm not sure if I've ever seen the talent market as hot in this industry as it is now.
Yeah. And I mean, it's I've seen some really good, ads for looking for engineers and
Mm-hmm.
managers in the space, and I've seen some really, I guess, interesting numbers. I've seen somebody looking for an experienced automation engineer with 15 to 20 years of experience. So I just I'm
Okay.
not sure exactly like what the requirements for that job are, but yeah, there's certainly a lot more demand. I think that, or I guess like my thought is that these companies are going to be more and more keen on getting engineers who are just good
Mm-hmm.
programmers and then bringing them up to speed on the manufacturing space. I don't think that the gap is that great. I've personally, I don't know if I ever told you the story, but I've trained a person that had a master's in exercise science. So
You
absolutely
haven't.
like zero electrical or electronics background, and walked in with me, watched the Solus PLC videos, and then walked in with me into a plant as a systems integrator. And like I would say, like 3 to maybe 4 months down the road, I had left like completely, and he was the one,
Oh
executing
wow.
every single project at that plant on Allen Bradley. So
Okay.
I think the gap is definitely possible to bridge if you've got a software engineer that's capable.
Mm-hmm.
Then it shouldn't take that long to bring them up to speed on the manufacturing space automation.
No, I think that there is, especially like software engineers learning to develop within, you know, maybe a different programming language within the ecosystem. I think that that's fairly straightforward. I've certainly worked with software engineers and helped them kind of explain what the process is. And then once they understand the process, they can go and continue to develop software. I
Yep.
think that as you mentioned, Vlad, we certainly need to find more ways to train people, and that might be, you know, again, plug for the Solus PLC. You know, what you guys are doing in the training videos you guys have, or what Sean Tierney is doing over at the automation blog, and the automation school, or what Tim Wilborn is doing with what they've got in the classes they have in Virginia or
DW controls. You gotta
yeah.
remember.
Oh,
There's so
sorry,
many
Tim.
platforms that like.
Sorry, Tim. And then, but also Frank, and like what Frank is doing,
Yep.
and he talked about it. And his mastering machine a couple of weeks ago was he had 4 people in, and that were interns, and he was giving them like the week rundown, and it was part of their internship programs. And I bring Frank up last because I think that we're going to have to find a lot more people who are willing to take, engineering co-op students or fresh engineering grads and put together a platform in which they can learn and grow. And I think we're going to need to see that on the engineering side, but I think that maybe more than that, we're going to need to see it on just kind of like the general OT engineering side. And especially when you talk about cybersecurity and those other things, the OT side is special, right? We do things in we do things in very unique ways, in very different protocols than you see in much of the IT side. So if it's IT folks kind of making the jump, or if it's training, I think we're going to need to see a huge push with the amount of people that especially these larger integrators are looking for on a regular basis. And I would hope that many of those integrators realize that they're going to need to do some of this training and can either leverage platforms and people who are currently training, or can go through the process of building some of their own so that they can continue to add to the ecosystem into the future.
I mean, I would recommend for them to look what's currently out there, but if they want to build on their own, that's definitely an option. I would say supplement what's already out
Mhm.
there. But anyways, I mean, I see value again. I think you've mentioned some like excellent names. I see value both
Mhm.
in the online learning, but also again in this space because we are so heavily hardware based. You do need some hands-on
Mhm.
training that would supplement the online. And again, I mean, like whatever the most cost-effective way to do that would be the recommendation from me.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree on that side. And now I kind of want to jump down the list and talk about trends because I'm not
Okay.
sure either of us are doing much work in this, but I want to talk about robots and robotic arms. It seems like,
Okay.
especially it seems like everyone is trying to implement robots, and it seems like every 20th post on LinkedIn I see how the United States is trying to implement, I don't know, 300,000 robots in 2021, right? Oh, and we're going to have one robot for every 10 people in a manufacturing facility by the end of the year, something along those lines. So
Yep. Yep.
I see a lot of robots. I see most robotic integrators that I know going down the path of trying to hire, trying to scale up. Again, I think it becomes a talent issue because there are only so many experienced robotic integrators out there. Have you had the opportunity to do some work on robots, or what's your thought on that trend?
So I haven't I haven't programmed the robots directly, but I've worked on multiple projects where I had to create an interface between primarily palletizing robots
Mm-hmm.
from a PLC to like a FANUC, for example. Right. So I would create the endpoints and then make sure that, let's say, the boxes came in correctly, the robot knows what the orientation is and all that good stuff. So I don't have experience programming robots per se, but I have worked on several projects. I also did a few case packers with ABB robots, again,
Yep.
mostly on the PLC and vision side, but ultimately those case packers had robotics as well. I mean, like, look, I'm curious to know about some of these applications. I've heard a lot about cobots that, but
Mm-hmm.
again, I think a lot of this, so there's several things, right? So there's palletizing where the robot just picks up the boxes that are coming in,
Yep.
stacks them in a certain pattern. I've seen a few robots that help again, like reorient very heavy packaging, like in
Mm-hmm.
a very specific application. And then what I've seen are case packing cells or just like packaging cells where
Mm-hmm.
you use primarily delta robots, right? Like the ones that have like the three arms and they move like
Mm-hmm.
really quickly because they can pick up products in very different orientations and then land them in very specific packaging.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest with you, I haven't seen much more than that. Like those would be like my main applications. And again, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting that those numbers are coming into play because to me it's slightly misleading, right? Because if you were again to buy a case backer, but
Mm-hmm.
now this case backer is equipped with three Delta robots instead of a chain that feeds that product in, like sure, you've technically increased the robot count by three, but have you really like changed anything? Like it's still a case packer that comes in, and it
Mhm.
still maybe has like a faster productivity or whatever, but you could have technically engineered in a way that case packer has the same throughput as the one with robotics. So I guess like I'm not exactly sure like how those robots are coming in. Like again, palletizing robots have been around for decades. Like sure, there's more being added to facilities. There's more
Mhm.
manufacturing. I feel like comes is coming back to the U.S. So definitely more robotics
Mhm.
being deployed. But I don't see like a huge uptick in robotics per se based on the current development of things, if I may.
Okay. Okay.
What are your
No, no,
thoughts on
I
that
think
then?
that that's very valid. I think that we will see more robots come into play as we get to the point in which manufacturing facilities struggle to attain and retain employees. And so if they don't have the ability to, bring employees in, they're going to have to look at different things like robots. And so in addition to the examples that you've talked about, Vlad, I've seen kind of an ever increasing number of welding robots
Oh, yep.
in a
Yeah,
bunch
yeah,
of different applications. A lot in automotive, right? So
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot in automotive, a lot in parts. You see them, and if you get them set up right, it makes it a lot easier for them to go through the process of doing the welding. And
But
you
has
know,
it been
very
manual in the past? Has like the welding operations like aren't haven't they always been fairly automated in the automotive space? Again, and I don't come from that industry specifically, but I always assumed, they have the painting robots, then they have the welding robots, then they have the cutting robots, whatever. Or you see a big difference now in
So
welding.
I've seen more welding robots, or maybe it's just I've
Okay.
paid attention and I've seen more welding robots. But I think, especially over the last 10 or 15 years, welding robots have just become have become more of a thing, right?
Okay.
Whereas, in the past, it's, you need a master welder and you have to hire someone. And welding and the trades such as that is always hard to find. Um,
Gotcha. Yep.
it is always, yeah, it's always hard to find, good, well qualified welders. And so I think that is and will continue to be a thing. And then I've seen a lot of applications. I don't know if they're technically cobots, but like loading, unloading, moving parts within CNC machines. So it's an arm that can go pick up the piece of raw material, put it in the fixture. The CNC machine goes through its process. It picks up the finished good, puts it on wherever the finished good goes, and then picks up the next one. So that becomes
Hmm.
how can I have, one person monitor a bunch of these CNC machines as opposed to one person per CNC machine. And so I see a lot of that. I've worked on a handful of those applications, and I've seen sometimes where you have one robotic arm maybe on a track working through two, three, four different CNC machines, and then
Yeah.
also kind of picking and lifting heavy things. So instead of, a raw material, call it a chunk of aluminum, a chunk of steel, needing to pick it up to put it into a press, to put it into a CNC machine. I've seen people, instead of like jib cranes, or instead of overhead cranes, or instead of someone doing that thing with a forklift that the OSHA folks would generally be not happy about, I've seen people potentially look at putting robots in there to alleviate, the stress on the humans. And I think in my experience, it's a lot of that, of how can we reduce the stress and strain on the humans, because we want them to enjoy their jobs and we want them to continue to work for us for longer periods of time. And investing in automation is one way to get there.
Yeah. No, I agree. Another area that I think is worth mentioning, it's machine vision. And
Hmm.
again, I wouldn't say that because of the pandemic specifically, there's been a notable uptick, but just in general, I think over the last decade, just with the technologies that have been, I would say, augmented, it's been easier and
Hmm.
easier to create applications for quality control purposes, I would say primarily. And so, like, one of
Hmm.
the most basic I would say applications is just reading a barcode, right, of
Hmm.
a passing box and making sure that the contents that have been dispensed into the box match the label. For again, like I come from a food and beverage industry primarily, and so you want to always check for allergens, right? Like if you have a certain type of a product that contains, like, let's say meat or dairy
Mhm.
or, like peanuts, for example, then you want to have a very tight control over what you're putting in and what the packaging says, right? Because again, that may lead to a death, right? If somebody
Mhm.
ingests an allergen. So, like, I guess like that's the basic of machine vision, but there's a lot more applications on the quality side. You can easily measure the contents. You can see,
Mhm.
if a label is there. Obviously, just like presence or absence, you can start counting parts. I've seen applications where, again, like they're trying to find a defects or change tolerances, and there's really cool things that you can do because you can send that information back to your PLC or control system and then make adjustments on the line in real time, whereas in before it required the intervention of an operator, like you were saying.
Absolutely. So machine vision has just been a thing that has been seemingly part of my life for, 10 years or more. And so you look at machine vision applications, and I certainly do see an uptick in machine vision applications. And I would say, I think part of that reason is because either the hardware or potentially software running on top of it it just continues to get better, right? And so instead of, a simple, binary, potentially yes, no, is there something within, this bottle? And then, it going down the conveyor belt and it getting rejected or not. Now you can look at colors. Now you can, scan not just barcodes, but entire labels. And it can go through this, it goes through, the computerized process of actually reading what's on the label, and it knows if it is correct or not. So that
Yep.
has gotten better. I remember looking at the Cognex, and we'll shout those guys out because it's right over your left shoulder. I remember looking at their software maybe a couple of years ago and was just shocked with the different levels of software that they can have. And it's almost to the point of they've got a ton of horsepower and processing behind that. So it's not just a camera that you're buying to tie into your HMI or your SCADA system. It's now you need to figure out how to take this and the software and the outputs of the software and tie it into your system, because what they're doing is so much better than what we'd even been doing 5 years before that.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I personally, and I'm a little biased, but I love the Cognex platform. I know that there's a few competitors out there who've got similar offerings that I'm not entirely familiar with, but the
Mm-hmm.
tools have become so much more accessible, I feel, for engineers, right? We went from the spreadsheets on the Cognex. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm talking about, on the Insight platform, to
Mm-hmm.
now the Easy Builder.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes very easy for anyone to, again, connect this on your laptop and be
Yep.
able to set up tools that would validate, what we talked about just a few minutes ago, and get a project running. To be honest with you, just get a proof of concept and then obviously create some kind of a bracket. I feel like those are the most complicated questions, at least for me. It's figuring out the lens, the because I'm not a camera guy, and that's a very important part of machine vision as well. But
Mm-hmm.
figuring out the bracket where this camera is going to sit, how
Mm-hmm.
repeatable is the process going to be? Because again, you don't want to reject what is it, like the false positives, or the you don't want to reject too much of the good product, or you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to pass too much of the bad product, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the critical items, as I've learned with machine vision, are lighting, and then your
Mm-hmm.
focus, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be your software.
Yep.
And so, but anyways, like, I guess my point is the software has changed tremendously, and it's more easier than ever, I think, to deploy some of these solutions. And I haven't even played with the new tools that Cognex has released. I think there's 3D cameras now. There's cameras with AI machine learning on the camera itself, and for better or for worse, it might be a buzzword, or it might be
Yep.
something that's completely revolutionary. I just like I said, I haven't spent enough time to take a look at their offering, but there are really interesting tools.
No, no, absolutely. And I think that brings up another thought, kind of in the hardware software. We've been
Hmm.
kind of going around this, is that we're making the hardware and software more intuitive. So it is less of a, you have to know the specific form of the software and have to know everything about it, and you're the expert in that. It's more of a, we're making it easier for people to pick it up, and it's more intuitive and it's easier to learn. And especially in the newer, younger startups and companies that we see, it's lots of them claim that the operators or the engineers on site are and can set this up. As to if people are going to set this up, or they're still going to hire someone to come in and set up the process, I think all of that that is still kind of to be determined. But the ease of setup is all important, and I
Yeah.
think we're seeing more offerings that become easier and easier.
And we see that shift with the traditional software space, right? There's something called no code. I don't know if that makes a
Yep.
reference, but essentially it's the I guess I wouldn't completely put like something like Node-RED in that bucket, but just the ability to kind of lay out blocks of code that you can then
Hmm.
connect, which makes it a lot easier for someone who doesn't have maybe the software in-depth knowledge, which can still be done, but doesn't necessarily need all that knowledge to make an application happen. And I think all of these tools are slightly or are shifting towards that direction, right? Like I've mentioned, the Easy Builder from Cognex. In the grand scheme of things, you're not really coding, in my opinion. But if you need to, you can still access the raw C++ under the hood, so to speak. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts, Dave, on AR and VR? I don't know if you saw some of the demonstration at the. I still remember the Rockwell Automation Fair, the last one before the pandemic. I think it was 2019.
Yeah, in Chicago.
2019. Yeah, in Chicago. And I guess they had some really interesting applications, but I have yet to see one in person, right? Like an augmented reality or a virtual reality setup that's used in a real plant. But I mean, again, I think it's interesting. What are your thoughts?
I have seen some of this, and I think I talked about it maybe briefly in January, and
Okay.
I'm still seeing more people interested in it. I'm working on a project or a couple of projects that is trying to leverage some of these tools. So it may
Okay.
not necessarily be augmented reality or virtual or virtual. I can't talk, virtual reality. But if everyone remembers the RealWear HMT1 goggles that I had on the January
Yep.
stream or the February stream, I am working with companies who are building this technology, who are leveraging and utilizing this technology in order to help kind of bring more information onto the plant floor. And so I think that we're going to get to the augmented reality and the virtual reality. And I think it will have to go mainstream where we're able to pull up information based off of scanning of a QR code or the system knowing where we are. But I think there's that intermediary point of we need to get the information to the people working on the plant floor so that they can make decisions on the plant floor as opposed to having to run back and forth. And that could be goggles, that could be wrist mounted tablets, that could be like workstation kiosks. And we have to make it as easy as possible. So it needs to have things like either easily searchable or easily, voice recognition. So you can walk through and tell the system what you want. And it sounds kind of sci fi, but these are applications that are currently being developed. And yeah, there are applications that are currently being developed, and I think we might still be a couple of years away from large scale adoption. But I know the Fortune 500s, the Fortune 5000s have been piloting these for 4 or 5 years at least. And with the cost of the hardware coming down and the kind of digital transformation we need to connect everything, it becomes a much easier. We need to connect everything, and then let's take that information and get it out on the plant floor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious to see what kind of improvements we're going to see. But like, I guess speaking of from end user maybe point of view, I think like documentation really shortens the time of repair and making sure that everything runs smoothly. And so hopefully some of the tools that you talked about are going to be implemented. I don't know if goggles are the immediate medium through which that information will be delivered, but even I know that the adoption of iPads has been greater and greater, and so you see them, I feel, very frequently now on the manufacturing floor. Maybe not like every operator has an iPad, but at least the leads now have iPads, and so just being able to distribute that information very easily is important. And same goes for MES OE systems that you can view now on mobile. I can't remember where we got that question. Maybe it was last time, but I think more and more we're seeing that digital transformation is
Mhm.
bringing those items in for their basic intended use, but then with an iPad, as we saw with Vuforia Chalk, I believe that's
Mhm.
the name.
Yeah, before you chalk, yes.
You can use the iPad and, like, let's say, augment your hardware, or like maintenance whatever equipment, and then
Mhm.
get more guidance than you otherwise would. So I think, like, as that hardware makes its way on the manufacturing floor and the
Mhm.
cost decreases, as you said, it's going to be easier and easier to say, well, look, we already have that in place, like, how about we add this application on top that would, again, shorten the time to repair, get the system running, and whatever.
Oh no, absolutely. And so I've been a big proponent of putting iPads on the floor for years. I think it makes more sense than setting up more workstations, or it makes more sense than, buying new HMI. So you can buy one of the normal iPads. What are they, like, $300 most of
Yep.
the time?
Yeah, yeah.
Less if you've got an enterprise agreement, but they're like $300. And then you put like $100 case on it, and it is exceptionally well protected, and then you can give it to your lead so they can go walk around and understand what's happening. You can give it to your maintenance and instrument techs so that they can pull up the information on the plant floor. And I think that we're going to see more of that. I have seen more of that. Both the Dave telling people that this is what needs to happen, and we go find ways to implement this onto the plant floor, or I'm seeing other people, going down the process of implementing iPads. I've actually seen some people implement iPads for like tracking, downtime counts on the
Yep.
plant floor next to HMI. So as something is happening at the operator system, they can go punch the information into the iPad, and they're able to pull it back in the database, as opposed to going to like a chalkboard or a whiteboard into the Excel spreadsheet. We're able to immediately capture what's happening at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And because I mean, like, that's the pushback that I've heard a lot in data as well, right? When you have, for example, a stop, sometimes the operators need to go back and like relog the information at a station. And I think the HMI is not always the right tool for that application, right? Like, it can be developed on an HMI and then be captured through the PLC and then through your database. But in many ways, it's easier, I think, both for the operator, but also for the developers to create something that's mobile ready and then capture that critical information directly from the floor, because again, like, it takes a lot easier. Like, you can use native like pop-ups that will prompt the operator, like, oh, like, what was this issue about, and they can give more information, or just tap a button to select from one of the pre-selected kind of buttons.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
Uh,
Dave, I think we can stop the episode here. I think we have a lot more topics on the digital transformation space, and we can probably go on about IIoT. It's a big topic. We can probably spend at least half an hour on that, but
mhm.
we want to try and be respectful of people's time for sure. If there's any questions following this episode, I do know that people view this after it has gone live. So
Mhm.
if you're watching this as a recording, you can always reach out to me or Dave and shoot your questions to us through messages, either on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Dave's
Mhm.
website, email, and other ways to, I guess, get in touch with us.
Yes, one of the many ways. So before we wrap this up, Vlad, I want to give a couple of shout outs. So Tim Wilborn, who is in the comments, he's going live tomorrow to go through, I think, one of his first PLC programs on
Yep.
YouTube. So you guys should absolutely check that out. And then Frank Lamb, who was on a couple of weeks ago, is at his end user facility down in Miami, and is doing another mastering in the machine. I think it's this Friday. And he's like gonna walk around the facility and go show us things and kind of go answer questions in a real life facility. I believe I saw that, or maybe it was a fever dream, and now I may or may not have committed Frank to doing this. But no, it should be very interesting. And I know that there are a lot of people who watch who, for whatever reason, feel like they want to get back out on the plant floor, or they haven't had nearly as many opportunities to spend time on the plant floor, and because of that, they want to. And because of that, they want to be able to see a little bit more. And I think Frank has talked about in the past going and doing that. So if you guys are either watching this live on June 9th or are watching it at some point, on the 10th or 11th, go ahead and check out those.
Yeah.
Those should be very interesting. And I'm going to try to catch both of them. I may or may not be able to, but I'm certainly going to try to catch them.
I mean, I think content like that where you see the actual manufacturing process is great. I think it's difficult to sometimes sign off on the NDAs, required to kind of capture footage of such a facility. But on the flip side, I think there's a lot of videos circulating even on LinkedIn right now that
Mm-hmm.
is, similar to how it's made episodes. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel that you don't get the full extent of the operations, by just seeing like very specific like camera footage of like one production line or a specific machine. So like raw footage from a plant is going to be really cool. So I'll probably be there to check that out if Frank actually does it.
Yeah, and if he doesn't, someone text me so I don't show up, and he doesn't tell me that he was doing it and it wasn't a fever dream. But no, Vlad, I think that sounds good. We should be live next Wednesday, the 16th. Theme TBD. We're working on a couple of things, so that's to be determined. But no, you want to try to be like mildly respectful of everyone's time this time, and say goodbye within the first 75 minutes.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the questions, the comments, and we'll see you in a week's time at the same 6 p.m. mark next Wednesday.
Perfect. See
Thank you,
everyone
everyone.
soon. Bye bye.
Take care.